So let me just see how many people are joining us and where people are joining us from. We have Cassandra, who's joining us from Cape Town. We have Tali Nate, who's joining us from Johannesburg. And today, Johannesburg was very, very sunny. So thank you for, we're very happy. Most people are very happy. We're suffering from heavy rains for the past few weeks. So today was a good day. And then as more and more people are joining us, they'll tell us where they're joining us from. As I said, my name is Mdunduli, and I'm coming to you from Johannesburg. In fact, in the premises of the Johannesburg Holocaust and Genocide Centre. And welcome to this live webinar event hosted by the Johannesburg Holocaust and Genocide Centre, the Kaplan Center, the University of Cape Town, and Investec. And tonight's event is a special event. It's a launch of a very exciting, very special online exhibition. And we will unpack the process of how this exhibition came about. And also we will hear some reflections from the curators, but also this exhibition was inspired by a 2018 student study tour of sites of the Holocaust, Holocaust history and memory in Poland, as well as in Germany. And tonight we have some of those students who were part of the 2012 student study tour in Poland and Germany, who will share their reflections with us tonight. Also, we will we'll have a panel discussion that will accompany this launch. So I'm very excited about that, to have this panel discussion with our three special guests who were part of that tour, and to hear their reflections and what it was like and how it changed their lives and their thinking. Because at that time they were students, and now they are no longer students. They are fully grown adults and professionals in different fields. And maybe this experience has helped them through this transition to becoming professionals in their different fields. So it will be very, very exciting to hear from them. We'll also hear from the academics who organized the tour and who were part of the group that took the students to Germany and to Poland. And it will be interesting to hear their reflections and their experiences and perhaps their future plans for perhaps a future tour. Who knows, when the world is better, hopefully. So it is now 3 minutes past 7 South African time. I think I'm going to start, and then as people come in, they'll just join us. The team behind the scenes will join us. So my name is Mdunduli, and I'm from the Johannesburg Holocaust and Genocide Centre. We will be honored this evening to hear opening remarks from Dr. Adam Mendelsohn, who is the director of the Kaplan Center. We'll also hear from Director Tali Nate, who is the founder and executive director of the Johannesburg Holocaust and Genocide Centre. She's also the chair of the South African Holocaust and Genocide Foundation. We'll also hear from Sharon Mix, who is from Investec, and she's part of the organization development, and she's a consultant as in the organization development area at Investec. And she was also part of the tour in 2018. So she will also share with us some of her experiences, as well as being here representing Investec. And we'll also hear from Ronel Kukamore, and I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. And Ronel was also part of the tour in 2018, but also she was involved in curating this exhibition. And so she will share with us both her reflections as having been part of the tour, but also her experiences in terms of curating this special exhibition. So it is now my privilege to invite Dr. Adam Mendelsohn to address us.
Thank you very much, Madhu, for that very warm introduction. And lovely to see so many familiar faces, particularly the students and others who came with us on the study tour. Now it feels unfortunately like in the very distant past, in a very recent 2018. Lovely to see friends and old faces. So in good ways and bad, the Holocaust resonates in South Africa. We see the bad in frequent public invocations of Nazism, Seemingly barely a week goes by without vaccine mandates or political parties and their leaders or particular causes being compared to Hitler or Nazism or the Holocaust. Jonathan Jansen has written about this phenomenon, the strange hold that Nazism has on the South African imagination and the ready rhetorical resort to Holocaust analogies in South African popular discourse. We seem to live in a place where Godwin's law operates on steroids. That's the idea that conversations, particularly on social media, reach an endpoint almost always with discussion of the Holocaust. And in a place where the invocation of the Holocaust is most often driven by ignorance rather than knowledge. By contrast to the bad, we see the good in the throngs of school groups that visit the Johannesburg Holocaust and Genocide Centre and its sister centres in Durban and Cape Town on a daily basis, as well as the university students that flock to courses on the Holocaust at universities like UCT. The national school curriculum reflects this resonance too. The Holocaust is included in the curriculum as a mechanism to discuss human rights and racism. This public fascination with Nazism and the Holocaust in South Africa, however, almost always fixates on the Nazi period alone. The analogies that are glibly bandied about focus only on the period from 1933 until 1945. There's good reason for this. Hitler and the Third Reich offer a starkly chiseled example of evil, an easy and obvious and potent metaphor for those in search of a rhetorical brickbat to throw at those that they disagree with, particularly on social media. The appeal of invoking Nazism is derived from the clarity it seems to promise. Who but a small fringe disagrees that the Nazi system embodied evil? What most people know about Nazism, moreover, is derived from popular media. Film and television has taught most people what they know about history, and particularly about Nazism. Film and television really stray beyond 1945 when dealing with the Third Reich. All ends with the fall of Berlin. As a result, there is broad ignorance of what came after. There is no attention to the rebuilding and remaking and reconstituting of Germany and the countries that it occupied or allied with. There is no attention to the complex and compromising and uneven and unsatisfying ways that these societies dealt with questions of justice and punishment and complicity and memory in the decades after 1945. There is no appreciation that we might learn much from these processes about how difficult and slow and compromising and challenging it is to deal with a difficult past. Here, in fact, a society like South Africa itself, less than 3 decades removed from the end of apartheid, might learn a great deal. Here, there is an instructive point of comparison. Just as Germany and Poland and Lithuania and the Ukraine and France have struggled with their World War II past, some more successfully than others, so too South Africa is in the early stages of its struggle with its past. This insight was at the center of the study tour designed and conceived of by Tali Nates. What might we learn, she asked, by focusing not only on the horrors of the Holocaust, but also on how Poland and Germany have dealt with this terrible past? How might attention to the complex aftermath of a terrible period help us with thinking about how South Africa grapples with its own past? With these questions in mind, the tour combined visits to Holocaust sites with seminars and discussions in Germany and Poland with historians and curators and activists and educators about the twisted road from Auschwitz to the present day. Our program focused as much on all the complex moral and legal and political questions left to be resolved after the Nazis were defeated as on the Holocaust itself. Our tour party consisted of 20 student leaders from the University of Cape Town, a very impressive group about and from whom you'll hear more this evening. The tour itself was made possible through the generosity of Investec, which not only underwrote our considerable costs, but sent Sharon along with us as a skilled facilitator and tour participant. This evening, you'll get a sense of what the tour set out to do and what it achieved. You'll hear from Sharon and Tali as well as from a small group of students who participated in the tour itself. And you'll hear from Ronelle, a student who was part of the tour party and who curated the web exhibition that we are launching this evening. Of course, all of this will provide but a foretaste of the exhibition itself. Please do yourself a favor and spend some time visiting the website. Not only will it introduce you to our students and their perceptive responses to the tour, but also demonstrates how much is missed in the shallow and crude ways that the Holocaust and Nazism are too often bandied about in South African society. Instead, in our students' perspectives, we'll find so much that is instructive of how the past can inform the present, and as well as hope for how a thoughtful generation of future South African leaders can engage with a difficult history. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Mandelson, for those opening remarks. And I would like to now invite Sharon Ricks to address us and to tell us more about her involvement. And yes, the floor is yours, Sharon.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Right. So thank you for the opportunity to say a few words on behalf of Investec and on behalf of myself, first and foremost, actually. I will be brief, but I do want to start with something that we've recently articulated as part of our purpose statement at Investec. and those are the words living in and not off society. And I'm going to repeat that. Part of our purpose statement at Investec is living in and not off society. And it's a philosophy that we hold near and dear in all that we do. At Investec, we really do believe we have a responsibility to make a difference as part of society and to contribute to this great country and its people. So as Investec, we are very proud to have been able to sponsor the Uct Study Tour. We believe it's an initiative that creates an important learning opportunity for future leaders of South Africa, and that they, or you, some of you on this call in turn, will make a difference in society. But none of this would have been possible if it hadn't been for the great work of Tali, Adam, Kim, Ayanda, and the rest of the team, and the work that you do to further this important exposure work for young leaders. Partnering with the Johannesburg Holocaust and Genocide Centre and the Kaplan Center for Jewish Studies is a great privilege for Investec, and hopefully we will do some more work together in the future. On a personal note, I want to say how grateful I am to have been given the opportunity to join this group of amazing students and staff in November 2018. My role, yes, as Adam said, was to assist with some of the facilitation of the learning, but truth be told, I really went for my own learning, and it was a big privilege for me. And I really want to thank you, Tali and Adam, for sharing your vast knowledge, and thank you to all the students and those of you on this call tonight. Your capacity to engage and work with a very complex European history and to draw parallels to our own country's history and present-day leadership challenges were truly insightful and very impressive. I learned so much from all of you. Thank you very much. And I'm looking forward to the launch of the exhibition tonight. Thanks for having me.
Thank you very much, Sharon, for those sincere, very thoughtful remarks. Thank you very much. And now I would like to invite Ronelle. Ronelle was part of the team that curated the exhibition, but also she was present in 2018 as part of the call. Ronelle, over to you.
Thank you so much. And yes, I have to echo what Adam and Sharon said, but also just to add my thanks as well. I think that, you know, for any of the students that went on the tour, this was an absolutely transformative experience. And it went from not just what we knew about the Holocaust, but, you know, about South African history and about Jewish history as well. So I can't thank you enough for this experience. But I'm just going to share my screen so that you can have a look at the exhibition rather than my face. There we go. So I think what I also just want to underscore is that the purpose of the exhibition was very much, we didn't want it to be a travelogue or an exhibition of the sites that we visited so much as, the student experiences of engaging with those spaces as well, which I think came through so beautifully because so many of the photographs were taken by the students themselves. So, it was a lot about what they had chosen and what had stood out to them. And I also had the opportunity to look through their reflective essays on it and to see what they carried with them from this exhibition. And just by way of an example, I think is this contested grounds section that I just want to spotlight quickly. For this portion of the exhibition focuses on the way that we interacted with the camps, the death camps, the concentration camps. But what was so interesting about this for me, and I think this photograph captures it so beautifully, is, these are horrific sites of extermination, and a lot of their histories are well known, or we've seen them on films or online. But there's something quite different about being there in person in terms of the Holocaust experience, but also in terms of the tourist experience of these sites. Which, like I said, I think this picture is great of, wanting that photograph of this infamous sign and the crowds of people. And then especially juxtaposing the going to Auschwitz with going to Chelmno and Plaszow, which was a very, very different experience, which I think a lot of us hadn't even heard of Chelmno before we went. So just to give you an idea, like in Auschwitz-Birkenau, you really get a sense of, a lot of the images that we've already had and seen on social media, in films. You've got your things like your guard towers, the barbed wire, and then when you're going to places like Plaszow, you've got these almost obscure, hulking Soviet-era memorials that are also seemingly a little bit out of place, and it's an extra layer of history that sort of we haven't really, we don't see as being a part of the memorialization of the Holocaust. And there's a great contrast of just Auschwitz being so full of these tourists, and you have an earpiece and you have a pre-recorded tour in 5 languages. And, I remember we arrived at Plaszow and it was just this empty expanse of land, and we sort of had to park on the side of the road with our big bus, and it was just such a contrast. And Plaszow is an interesting example of that because it was sort of infamous in the Schindler's List film. But then Chelmno, I think for everybody, was, in the essays, it really came through that Chelmno was such an affecting site because it was such a big part of this history of the death camps. And yet it was also, we arrived, there was nobody else there. Our tour guide could hardly speak English. If you drove past it, you would have missed it. And then, to go to the forest where a lot of the atrocity also happened, and where a lot of people's families' remains were, was quite a devastating experience, I think, for a lot of us, because, and there you also have, it's not a memorial site because you have gravestones and they are in Yiddish, or they're in Hebrew, or they're in Polish, and you don't, there's no English, there's no plaque saying this happened here or this happened there. And it almost feels a little bit criminal, and it's not a critique of the sites that are more famous, but it is an important realization of the politics of all these memorials. And I think that's a lot of what Tully and Adam wanted us to look at, is that in the South African context, we have a similar political flavor to a lot of our memorialization. And then just to quickly also, draw to the section, this artifact section, which was also very interesting because on the one hand, you have these very deliberate artifacts and found objects of people. So just to show you, you know, the toothbrush and toothpaste there at Gelmno, and then the infamous triangles and the passbooks, the trains, the uniforms. I just want to show this specific one. And then the prosthetics at Auschwitz that give you not only a sense of, you know, the loss of life, but the magnitude as well, and the canisters of your Cyclone B. So it's all very affecting, but it's also very much a part of the museum experience. And then what was interesting for me was contrasting that with things like this image, which is what we found on the Nazi rallying grounds in Nuremberg, which was a fire pool to sort of give that Roman grandeur image. But then at some point after, you know, the defeat of the Nazis, it was repainted this color and repurposed as like a splash pool at a water park, and then now is sort of abandoned at the back of this old, you know, Nazi era thing. And I think it was just such an interesting way to see that, you know, it's in the everyday, you know, these histories and these pasts, and how it can be very awkward to grapple with atrocity and the things that are used in those regimes. And I think the South African example is, you know, we are seeing that awkwardness now with things like renaming buildings and taking issue with things that for a long time were, you know, considered, you leave them alone, we've dealt with that, we've shelved that. So that for me was really the vision behind the exhibition. It was just to sort of map the student engagement with the spaces. I'm not sure, Ndu, if I have time still.
Yes, you have a little bit of it.
Okay, and then I also just wanted to you know, draw attention to this part of the exhibition, the presences and absences, because this for me was also something quite affecting. Was, you know, not only were we visiting these sites, we were staying in these cities, and, you know, going out at night, or, you know, driving to the airport, and you're experiencing cities where people are still living and where life is going on as usual. And then every now and again, there's these little things that bring you back to, you know, what happened and what these sites were. And these Stoppelstene, and we talk about it, but in the exhibition, but these were these like bronze plaques that have been put outside spaces where Jewish people lived and where they were taken away. But they are all over Berlin. I remember when we did the walking tour, and just, you know, you can walk over it so quickly and you don't realize it's there, but that was someone's life once, that was someone's house. And I think that, you know, we had tiny little examples of that the whole way through. And then again, you have your conscious memorialization, which especially in Berlin came through. Here is the memorial to the Roma and the Sinti. And here's again the Stoppelstene, and you can see the cigarette butts and the litter. That's sort of, you know, because it's a part of a working, living city again. And yeah, and of course this memorial to the murdered Jews of Europe, which was also incredibly affecting. And then contrasting that as well to, you know, the more mundane ways that you can see this history. It just won't go away in these cities as well. And then, like I said, which I don't think I have time to get into now, but things like the Soviet era attempts at memorialization, which were quite interesting because they had these very harsh, big, hulking, communist-looking memorials that sort of seem out of place now, but it's that extra layer again on the history. And then just lastly, to draw attention, I see Cassandra's on the call. Sorry to spotlight you, Cassandra. This picture of Wawel Castle, which was like, I think we could see it from our hotel in Krakow. And it's actually, you know, it's this beautiful building that, you know, predates the Nazi era, but was also, you know, used for Nazi purposes and was a part of that history. But it's sort of, when none of us knew that when we went there. I think we were all attracted to the old worldliness of it. But you know, it's an inescapable past. And I think for the South African case study, that's very important because, you know, you can walk down any street and there's an apartheid past, a colonial past that's coming with you, whether it's consciously memorialized or not. So also just to sort of draw attention to that, and how I think it was a bit uncomfortable for some of us to deal with how much of that, how many layers of history, but also is that justice? Is that sufficient memorial to sort of highlight certain things over others? So that was really the vision of the exhibition. I'm not sure. I don't want to ruin it. So, but yes, so I hope everyone enjoys it. And just thank you to the student participants for the incredible photographs as well. It was very interesting to see it through your eyes. Thanks.
Thank you, Ronelle. Thank you for that, for that tour. Maybe you can stop sharing your screen. Oh, thank you. Yes. Thank you. Thank you for the tour. And also you explained it with such emotion. I was very envious. I wish that I could have been part of that tour. So maybe sometime in the future, hopefully, so I hope so. And so now let us dive deeper into the experience of that tour. And Ronelle has sort of started sharing the experiences of what it was like to be there. But I would like now to invite our three special guests who were at that time students who were part of that study tour to engage with us in this panel discussion and to reflect on that experience and also now, their lives now. So I would like to invite Nicole Jones. Nicole was studying at the time towards an honors degree in international relations. And presently, Nicole is working as the corporate communications and marketing officer for the African arm of several global sports brands as part of the Milka Sports, a specialized private equity firm. And so welcome, Nicole. Thank you for taking the time to be here.
Thank you.
Thank you. I would also like to invite Thando Ndita. At the time, Thando completed her Bachelor of Social Sciences, specializing in international relations and philosophy. And presently, Thando went on to complete her LLB and is currently doing her articles of clerkship to become an attorney and works at Norton Rose Fulbright. She's working in corporate mergers and acquisitions, but hopes to explore maritime and medical law later this year. I hope that was correct, Thando.
Yeah.
And then finally, I would like to invite Langa Twala, who perhaps now we can refer to as Dr. Twala. So at the time, Langa was studying towards his medical degree, which he has completed. And currently he's in the internal medicine department at Gray's Hospital and Edendale Hospital. And his main interest is in ophthalmology, where he hopes that he can make access to restorative vision surgery available to all for free. And that is quite a deep goal and quite an amazing goal. And I do hope that you are able to accomplish that. So to all three of you, welcome. Thank you for taking the time out of your evening to be part of this discussion. My first question that I would like to begin the discussion with is, can you reflect on the tour? What made the deepest impression on you as part of the tour? Or what can you recall most powerfully that was part of the tour for you? Maybe I'll start with Nicole.
Thank you, Mdu. I think what resonated for me the most with the tour is that I think I had understood, or thought I had understood from an academic perspective. I'd done the research, I'd gone through the process of studying it at a high school level, at a university level. And you can make all the academic you can tick those boxes, you can have those answers, but to physically be walking the streets that these people walked, both oppressed and oppressor in such a very tangible way, and to see the deliberate nature of memory in Germany and in Poland, and also the contrast between how memorialization is done between those two places, was very jarring in comparison with the South African experience of memory, where we're almost in such a hurry to move beyond our past. Whereas in Europe, what I found, or what I felt, was that there was a deliberate attempt to involve it into everyday society, where I think a lot of the times the experience in South Africa has been to move past it, and how easily can we erase it and move beyond those conversations because they're uncomfortable to have. So I think that was definitely something that resonated with me the most. Also, just the comparison between, as Ronald mentioned, the tourist experience, but then also the research experience and the understanding experience, where these are sites that you're visiting because it's a once in a lifetime opportunity. But by that same token, the knowledge of the places that you are visiting was definitely very, very jarring.
Thank you, Nicole, for that, for making those connections. And then I want to move on to Thando. Thando, what was your, what made the deepest impression on you as part of the tour?
Okay. Well, I mean, I think just to sort of go back to what Ronald said earlier about sort of being a tourist and also being there to sort of remember and to understand the history. I think a lot of what I felt was conflict, because on the one hand, you know, you are there as a student, you're there to learn the history, and you're satisfying an intellectual curiosity. But I also think in a deeper sense, there was a huge feeling of hopelessness, because there's a sense of, well, why am I here, like 60, 70 years later, what difference would this do, and all of those different things. And so I think for me, like going into the tour, I think I was a first year law student at the time. And so I mean, I think I kind of went into it with a sense of, like justice and atoning for the past and like all of these things. And I think like similar to what Nicole said, it was quite interesting because it did sort of feel like the history hadn't been buried. I kind of felt a sense that maybe, I suppose because they've had the benefit of several decades passing and all of that, but it did sort of feel like there had been an extent to which those countries have sort of like sat in their own history and like not sort of tried to like skip steps and sort of, be a rainbow nation without like addressing, like resentments and like all of these different things. So I think that was one of those things for me. Just sort of like feeling very conflicted, feeling very sort of hopeless about it, and in a sense of what difference does me being here make, and like all of those different things.
Wow, yes, I think the present South Africa is very complicated and confusing at the same time. So I do understand, I do relate also to those feelings of conflict and feeling conflicted about being a young person now with this history, and what do I do with it? How do I deal with it as a young South African who is moving through the world and moving through life? What must I take with me? What must I leave behind? It gets very complicated, yes. And I want to bring in Langa. Langa, what made the deepest impression on you?
First I'd like to just say thank you, Mdu, for the introduction and for facilitating, and thanks to all the speakers that have preceded us thus far, especially a shout out to Ronel. I thought that exhibition, I know you didn't want it, or as you said, you didn't want it to be sort of, taking us through the tour, but it very much was a memory lane for me, having been on the tour. And it really brought out a lot of emotions, which I experienced on the tour. And I think Thando expressed it so well, the things that really stood out for me. She used the word conflict. For me, it was just a great contrast between everything. And they existed, so close together. So, for example, the contrast between life and death. I think, for example, of moments where we'd be standing right between that decision and how it was made in split seconds. For example, when we had just sort of arrived or landed in Auschwitz, and we were in that central train station where a lot of the captives, so to speak, were assessed as to whether they could work or whether they should, really almost literally, and sorry to use the language, but go be fit really to be persecuted, to be to be slaughtered. And it was that contrast, standing in such moments, that was so striking for me. And then, of course, the contrast between the ugliness and the beauty. I think, for example, when we went to Onesie House, which was in this beautiful, luscious Nuremberg forest, I think it was one of the pictures Ronelle outlined, and the mansion was just gorgeous. And I thought to myself when I first got there, sure, I'd love to live in a house like this. I'd love to build this. And then to think that, a group of about 12 individuals came and spoke about, how to kill, the Jewish problem, how to massacre over, millions of people. So those contrasts for me were very striking on the trip. That picture standing by the Auschwitz sign, "Work shall set you free," and that's an area of great captivity. And bringing it to our day, how there's no freedom in work in many areas. For example, in the apartheid system, when people were told when they could be migrant workers, work in the mines, or even in our capitalist system, when we're told we can, if we just strive to a certain career path, we can set our family free economically, and then we're inundated in debt and increasing petrol prices, trigger warning. So those contrasts for me were what really stuck with me on throughout the trip.
Well, I think many of you, thank you for that, Langa, and for taking us deeper a little bit. And I want to go deeper in terms of your thinking when you were there as part of the tour. And I think Thando also alluded to this, that she was asking herself, what does being here, what difference does it make if I'm here? And that goes to what you were thinking, your psyche. So I want to know, how did the tour affect your thinking about yourself and the world? So I'll start with Nicole again. How did this affect the way you think about yourself and yourself in the world?
I think if for anyone who's been able to read my reflective essay, Ronelle, Tali, Adam, I'm sure you'll know this. The tour was a very overwhelming experience for me on a personal level in a way that I didn't expect. When I sat down to go through the process of writing that reflective essay, to me it was peculiar, it was personal, it was painful, but it was incredibly intimate at the same time. And by the time we had gotten to Berlin, I was incapable of being social. I wasn't able to join my fellow tour mates in terms of going out and exploring the city, as much as what we were in this position to experience these incredible things. At that point, I think I was so emotionally drained that I wasn't capable to explore the tourist end of what we were able to do. And the parallels that I felt throughout the course of the tour between my own history as a colored woman that maybe doesn't have as much insight into her own histories, and drawing parallels to these very visible sites of memorial, and almost feeling, for lack of a better way to put it, a sense of envy for the history and the sense of belonging. And I think there was a point that I got to where I looked around, and I think I speak under correction, but it was at the Platzau Memorial, where I stood, and as Adam was saying a prayer, I thought, these people here, what they have experienced, there has not been a loss of faith. There has not been a loss of community. There there's such a strong sense of self-reliance and interdependency, a sense of community that I think in my personal experience of being a colored woman in South Africa, that I sometimes long for, in terms of how history and my own culture has sort of manifested over the years. And I think at that point, the mental state that I was in was one where I was incredibly fragile, and being able to experience the realities of the Holocaust, but also looking at it through a very personal lens and understanding it through lessons that I had seen impact in my grandparents' lives, and I'm sure many people could draw similar similarities to generations of their own family. So it was incredibly personal in a way that was very unexpected for me.
Wow, thank you for that, Nicole. Just as a follow-up question, quickly, maybe this might be a personal question, but have you been able to find or discover your sense of belonging in South Africa? Was that
So funnily enough, in the time that has passed since the tour, I have actually embarked on a little journey of self-discovery, for lack of a better way to put it. And I have been able to find out a little bit more in terms of my ancestry, where my great-great-grandparents, where they've come from, what their experiences were, the languages they spoke. And very interestingly, the mourning that I felt on the tour, as much as what it's somewhat been remedied now, I think there's still an element of that for what was lost. In something that I speak to in my essay was a tongue that will never know its own language. And I think there's many different parallels that we can draw, but I think there are some things that we're always going to miss, be that in the context of South Africa or in the context of the Holocaust.
Wow, thank you. Thank you for that. I want to ask Thando. Thando, how did the tour affect the way you think about yourself and the way you think about the world and yourself in the world?
Okay. Well, first of all, I'll preface this by saying that the tour was honestly one of the most important things that I've ever done. So like I said, I was a first-year law student at the time, and I think that was perfect timing, because I think after that, like, it really, really shaped sort of like my passions and like the sort of like my long-term career plans and all of these different things. So like at the beginning of the tour, I was like very excited to go to Nuremberg, because, you know, that's the birthplace of international criminal law. And, you know, that I was really interested in that. I was like very excited to go to Courtroom 600 and all of those things. And I think throughout my education, like, I have made a deliberate effort to study international law, public international law. And like a lot of it really has been shaped by World War II. So I think for me, it had sort of like that sort of intellectual interest that was stimulated in something that I really do hope to pursue long term. And on a more personal level, I think it was very interesting to kind of think of myself and sort of the role that I would have played had I been in that situation. So for instance, I think, you know, like, as we all say, hindsight is 20/20 vision and all of that. So it's quite easy to say, I would have hidden Jews in my basement. I would have done this and this and this. It's very easy to be admonishing towards people of the past and to judge them very harshly and like all of these different things. So I think it was more sort of looking at the concepts of victim and perpetrator, you know, and I think specifically the word villain to me is very interesting, because I think there's being a villain in terms of, you know, committing positive acts. You know, you're the one persecuting, you're the one planning genocides, and you were at Vanzi House and you made the decisions and like all of these different things. But I think being a villain also maybe sort of has another layer to it, which is sort of you observed it, you did nothing. But then also at the same time, if you're an observer, then you probably don't have the power to be sort of have any sort of like practical impact on whatever it is that's happening. So I think for me, it's quite interesting to kind of like think about those different things. So I think that sort of like came up a bit as well when I was in Germany, because obviously like the majority of German people were not actively killing anyone and all of that. But in many ways, you know, like there was a lot of complicity and all of these different things. So it was quite interesting in that sense. And you're thinking about things that are happening right now. In my reflective essay, I wrote something about how, you know, we judge people for not having been more proactive and all of these things, but how many CNN notifications do we swipe away when we hear about a genocide in Ethiopia or Yemen and like all of these different things? So I think it's quite, like I said, I think it kind of goes back to that feeling of being conflicted because, you know, I think most of us won't ever be sort of villains in the true sense. Like we're all very unlikely to be warlords or to commit crimes against humanity and plan genocides, but we are extremely likely to observe it, whether it's like online, whether it's, you know, violence in our homes or in friendships or whatever. So it's quite a, yeah, very, very conflicting, I found, but one of the most important things I've ever done. So, yeah.
Wow. You're right. You know, the idea of choices and what choices would we make in certain situations, even if the situation is not a genocide or it's not a big event, but in our own personal lives, we go through situations where we see something that is unfair, or we are part of a situation where someone is treated a certain way and you have to make a choice. It might be to say something or to walk away, but we all have those choices. And you're right, we cannot judge. So we have to, and I find that that's a very good way to connect to a history that is far away from you, but to connect it personally, to think, well, what would I do? Or what have I done in situations in my life as I've gone through my life? What choices have I made? Thank you for that, for that, Thando. And then I want to move on to Langa. Langa, how did this affect your thinking about yourself, the world, and yourself in the world?
Yeah, I contended with this question throughout the tour, precisely because there were many intersecting identities that I carried within myself, and a lot of them were brought to the fore, I would think, during the tour. A lot of it was trying to actually find my identity within the tour, why I was there. Obviously, as Nicole mentioned, theoretically, that was clear, but trying to actually live the story was difficult. So I'll give you an example. We were once within Auschwitz. There was this row of books that bared names of family names of victims at Auschwitz, and of course everyone is looking at the names, and there was quite a subset of people that was looking for their family name, naturally so, and I think maybe it was the majority of the group, and then I just looked just for completeness sake, but obviously I knew I wouldn't find Twala there. So that was, there was that element of it. So, where am I, and am I allowed to be feeling these emotions that I'm feeling of sadness, of, being a part of that. But then at the same time, so that's obviously my identity as an African, as a young Black man. But when I would face my identity as, as a Christian, and in particular as a Jehovah's Witness, that's when I would then, be able to relate a bit more. We, for example, had the Purple Triangle, and we were a group of people that were also persecuted in that time. So, when those things came through, when I thought of the story of August Dickman and how he was the first person, publicly persecuted, shot for his conscientious objection, those were things that really then started to resonate with me. So there were those intersecting identities. And then, of course, in my profession, we had a walk in Berlin, a monument walk, And part of the displays was of the medical atrocities that happened with the research, and especially research into the, those who were mentally disabled, who struggled with mental health, and just the atrocities that were happening there. So that really then pulled me into the, as Tando mentioned, the perpetrator role, somewhat of a villain even. And, if I was practicing then already, would I have done that? And sometimes, relating to your last question of me in the world now, sometimes I think about it when I'm practicing, especially in a setting where, which I find myself in now, with huge patient loads and very little to do for a lot of people that are very sick. And there's always that temptation to say, well, I don't have to go the extra mile with this person, because they're probably going to die within the week, or they're probably going to die within the month. And then there's something that comes back from that trip, that says to me that this was probably the mentality that led people to, to sideline certain people, even to use certain people in certain experiments. I think, no, that's actually someone's mother, that's someone's sister, that could very well be my family. And so the trip definitely affected the way I think about the world. It's contextualized my place in the world in many ways, to think about why certain things are the way they are. A lot of the time we speak of systemic things, but to think about how people frame these systems and how it's come to be that now I find myself in this place. I'm probably going to touch on another point of discussion now, but I'll leave that for later. But particularly where South Africa is in the stream of time, and where I fit in there. So it's definitely impacted a lot. And I must say, I haven't figured it out. The trip, as Adam mentioned in the beginning, Prof. Adam, that sometimes it feels like a distant memory. Other times it feels like it was last week, and I'm still in the middle of that huge, philosophical conundrum.
Well, Langa, thank you for starting that conversation about South Africa and making these connections to South Africa. Because as you were speaking, in fact, as all of you were speaking, I thought about how grateful I am for democracy, even though our democracy in South Africa is very fragile and is challenged. But it's a democracy. It is here as it is. And I'm grateful even just for that, because I have the power. I'm grateful for power that I have in this democracy as an individual. So let's come to South Africa's challenges. I'll start with you, Langa. What impact did this tour have on how you think about South Africa's challenges as the democracy that we are?
So, thanks, Madhu, for the question. It really is, the tour definitely brought me, right into thinking about that, because as Nicole mentioned, it was disheartening in some ways to see how much memorialization has happened in Europe and how far we are from that, in many ways. And as a result, I also tried to, when I got back, to try and look into what sites do we have. Maybe Jewish people and Romas, etc., Romani people, they think the same way that I do, living here, but they don't know what's in their country. So I also started looking, but I have still found that that's unfortunately the truth. And so it's really helped me to put into context and into the stream of time where we are as a country in that process of memorialization and in that process of coming to grips with what happened. So South Africa is probably 1 or 2 generations from, the grips of apartheid. And we're at the stage where there's a lot of dialogue within this Rainbow Nation democracy, about forgiving, about forgetting. And the generation that's coming after that, so us, we've sort of questioned that, and some of the political movements that have come through have questioned that, have said, but it's so soon, it's too soon to sort of forgive and forget. And how do you forgive perhaps people who are not asking for forgiveness, who are not repenting of those wrongdoings? And then you look at it in Germany and Poland, and you look at the generations that came after the Holocaust, and they grappled with the same things. They went through the same motions. At some stage, they were speaking about forgiving and forgetting in the immediate generation afterwards, and there were no monuments. There were no reparations. But then the generation after that said, but that's not how things can happen, and that change was uncomfortable. And that's the awkward, uncomfortable stage that you spoke of, that we find ourselves in as well. But then it's about, so what's next? And of course, it struck me as well that there's regress again happening in those countries. So for example, we were at Brandenburg Gate, and we're going about our tour, we're enjoying the beauty of the place. And suddenly we're struck with a nationalist protest, a neo-Nazi protest happening right there. And, a few of us are even given stare downs, and, the flags are, almost brought to our attention. And some curious members of our tour, crept a bit closer, and unfortunately they were met with, a lot more of that hatred, I must say. So that just outlines the regress. It's the same thing that happened at Radegast in Poland. Obviously, at it was a much more minor scale. But when we were speaking to the tour guide, he was a Polish nationalist, and he then spoke of how the Polish government and the Polish people back then, he doesn't think that they should have to take responsibility. Their hands were tied. That's what had the Nazi government came and made them do things. So there it was obviously a more subtle thing, but also pushing responsibility. So anyway, bringing that back to South Africa, when I see those things happening now, and in the systems that I'm in, even on a micro scale in my day-to-day living, and I see that, and I have those conversations, I remember that it comes to me, and I try, in my instinct is not to immediately, it's not a fight or writing reflex, but to try and think about it. So when, for example, the Phoenix protests happened, and the very recent racial conflicts and tensions, that brought me right back there to that trip. So in different ways on a day-to-day basis, I think about where we are as a country, and I think about where we're going. And it brought a lot of hope to me that as the generations come on, I can have a role in my small role that I get to play, a small part to bringing that generational change, bringing realizations, bringing, curatorship of my own story within the South African context, within the South African democracy.
Wow, thank you, Langa, for that. And that's a very deep thing, because, as you were speaking, I was thinking there's personal trauma, there's my trauma as Mdu, as an individual, and then there's collective trauma that my community or your community has been through. And you have to work through your own trauma, and then we have to find a way to work through this collective trauma. But with sometimes trauma, there's anger. And that's how trauma sometimes manifests itself, through anger and taking responsibility of that anger. And we often see outbursts of anger in South Africa for various reasons and at various stages of our democracy. And this is part of the challenge in South Africa. These various outbursts, they challenge our democracy. So I want to go to Thando. Thando, how did the tour impact on how you think about South Africa's challenges?
Okay, well, I think just thinking about South African history and where we are now, obviously one of the most tragic things that have ever happened, one of the most tragic effects of apartheid in our history is sort of our mass racialized poverty and all of those different things. And I think going to Europe, it's easy to sort of feel like, oh, well, look at all of these like memorials and like these people are, you know, like they've moved on and like all of these different things. And maybe that's true to an extent. But I think for us, like coming back to South Africa, I almost feel like memorials and like places of commemoration and all of these things would almost feel insufficient, because I remember someone on the tour, I think it must have been Ayanda or someone, they said something like, for us, we don't really have memorials because our sites of conflict and things that we memorialize are things like townships, places of poverty, and like things like that. And so those are our sites of memorialization, and it's almost quite painful to sort of like look at it in that way. So I think sort of like thinking about, oh, well, we should have more museums and like all of these things. We do actually have memorials, but they're a lot more sort of tangible, and like people live there, and it's still sort of, it's not a memorial because it's still something that's happened, and it's something that still hasn't really been alleviated, and like all of these different things. So it's quite tragic in that sense when you think of it that way. And I think just sort of like thinking about poverty in general and just sort of the knock-on effect of all of those things. Like I've done like some work in medical malpractice, and one of the things that you have to do is if someone suffers a claim, you have to sort of quantify their life. You have to be like, okay, well, this person had completed matric, and so they probably would have made this amount of money, and so this is how much you have to compensate for them, compensate them in money and all of these things. But then you have situations where people didn't have the opportunity to complete matric or to sort of like attain a certain level of education, and almost in an instant that person is sort of viewed as deserving less money overall, because, you know, the perception will be, oh, well, maybe they would have earned minimum wage throughout their lifetime, and so our compensation for them should be this amount of money, as opposed to this person who has an education and all of these different things. And a lot of it isn't really to do with inherent ability as it is so much socioeconomic issues. So I think like sort of like thinking about all of those things, and the fact that, yes, we might have sort of like legal rights and like all of these different things, but the effects of poverty, and more specifically racialized poverty, cannot be overstated. And so it's sort of like those sorts of things that I was thinking about, yeah.
Wow, yes. Yeah, again, South Africa is still a very racially complicated, complex, troubled, terrifying country, very fragile. And what happened in Phoenix, as Langa alluded to, it's just one of those examples where something can happen and something bursts. And we have to find a way to deal with that. And if we don't deal with it, there'll be more and more and more and more of these racially motivated outbursts of anger in various places in South Africa. Nicole, to come to you, how did the tour make you think about South Africa's challenges? And maybe what challenges have you noticed in South Africa?
So I think similarly to what Thando and Langa have both mentioned, you know, the delusion of history is that things are in the past, that they're gone. Things have happened, we're now moving forward. It's something we don't have to sort of experience again. We might have to consider it, we might have to factor it in, but it's not something we ever have to experience again. And I think specifically the example that Langa mentions in terms of that immigration protest that we witnessed, and drawing the parallels from that protest and the sentiments expressed there to South Africa's own issues with xenophobia, and understanding that as a nation, in terms of its nation building and restorative process, if we can call it that, South Africa is actually not that far along. And I think while on the one hand, we find ourselves having almost pressed fast forward to having these conversations about forgiveness and moving forward and the Rainbow Nation mentality, while, as Thando mentioned, we're essentially living with the legacy of apartheid right now. It's not even a legacy really, it's just the very tangible outcomes of what the apartheid regime set out to accomplish. And as much as what we are nearly 30 years down the line post-apartheid, we're still very much grappling with the realities of what that government sought to achieve and what it had achieved, and the very real impacts that has on the average South African citizen. And then I think when we look at these challenges, it's important to understand it from that perspective of anger. There's a very personal link that is still very tangibly felt. We're not even going back through the generations. We have parents, we have grandparents who still lived under this regime and experienced the terrors that it had to that it imposed upon people. And I think we almost need to step outside of the dismissal that can come when we rush to a conversation about smoothing things over. That was something that I became very aware of. But in terms of drawing parallels between how Europe and specifically Germany and Poland have dealt with the process of memorialization and then moving into a South African context as well, something that for me was very jarring was to see the rise of the right wing in Poland specifically, and then also, like I mentioned earlier, with that immigration protest in Germany. And even most recently in South Africa's municipal elections, you see a lot of political parties who are drawing ethnographic lines in the sand, for lack of a way to put it. And to refrain from mentioning any sort of specific parties, because there are so many of them where you see this element creeping into policy. It's very scary for me as a South African, but then also as someone who's experienced this tour and has seen what has happened in Europe in terms of the rise of the right wing, because it's very scary to see those sort of inclinations being so prevalent so early when we have a very direct link, a very clear visibility on what those sorts of sentiments affected previously in South Africa. And I think where we're moving toward is a place of, or my personal feeling around where we're moving as a nation is one of trepidation. I think I'd be naive to say that there wasn't a little bit of fear sometimes in terms of where we're heading, because I do think that anger is still very raw and it's very real. And I think when we don't look to address it from a holistic perspective in terms of the socioeconomic aspect, and in understanding how racialized that is and how it is inherently tied to what our country's legacy has been, we run the risk of deepening those wounds in our attempt to smooth over them. But at the same time, I must echo what Langa mentioned, is that I cannot help but be hopeful. And in a large part of that is from the experiences that I had on this trip and in speaking to people and having the conversations with our mentors, with each other as students, all of us coming from very different backgrounds, different academic backgrounds, different personal backgrounds as well, but then also just having conversations with people that we came across, the university students that we met in Poland. There's an inherent sense of hope, I think, that we'll find within most of us that are here on the Zoom call today, that there needs to be a willingness to work. And I think if this room, for lack of a better way to put it, the Zoom, is any inclination, I think there's definitely a willingness here. There definitely needs to be a political willingness. There needs to be a social willingness. There also just needs to be a transparency in terms of calling a spade in some cases. But yes, I think the place that we as South Africa are in currently it's an interesting one, but I think we're still in our infancy, and we would do ourselves an injustice to rush ourselves through the process of dealing with the legacy of what apartheid left us with.
Yes, that's so true, Nicole. It's a process. So South Africa is a country in the making. We're still in the making. We're going through the process. We don't know what that process will, when that process will end, what that end will look like. We can only hope that it will be a positive end, but it is a process. and it'll go through its twists and turns, and it is frightening sometimes. Wow. Thank you very much for that, for all of your reflections, and for really indulging us with personal reflections, and not just saying the right things in front of everyone, but really giving us, in a way, the raw truth of what that experience was like for you as individuals. Thank you very much. But you know, I want to bring in Tali as well. And maybe if Adam also wants to add to this discussion, but I want to bring in Tali. So Tali was there as one of the academics that arranged and guided the students through there, and also Tali is part of this launch. Tali, any reflections from your part that you would like to share with us?
Thank you, Mdu, and thank you, everyone. It's absolutely wonderful to reunite and reflect together. And actually, the gift of few years in the past, of course, 2 years of challenges with COVID allowed us to make a lot of connections to resilience, issues of choices, and other issues. I think. Where I want to come in as a historian, educator, coming from a background of activism, memory activism, this group of amazing leaders, 20 leaders, was really a thoughtful, inquisitive, and determined group of thinkers, philosophers almost. And it was an amazing experience to do the journey with you and with the full group. I just want to mention that these kind of study tours, we started with the help of Investec and with different universities since 2015. The first one was with the University of Free State. We did also 2 with the University of Cape Town, and 1 with professionals in the human rights field from different African countries in 2019. And it is amazing to see the connections, the multi-directional connections that you can do when you go to Germany and Poland. You learn about the Holocaust, you learn about communism, the GDR in West Germany, you look at post-colonialist societies. It's just amazing the connections that you can make if you just open it. And I wanted to add my voice and to say that these kind of study tours are really important for us as a young society, a young country that can learn about ourselves by reflecting on what other societies did and did wrong sometimes. You know, it's not only did right, but did wrong, because that can teach us so much about where can we go, what can we learn, and what can we learn not to do. Can we shortcut our journey to healing? So just a few further reflections, what a joy it was, what a learning it was for me to be with this specific group of leaders that was so amazing.
Thank you for that. And before I take questions from the audience, we just have a few minutes left. We don't have a lot of time left, unfortunately. But maybe there will be people in the audience who will have questions, or maybe former students, people who are also students, who are also part of the tour, who maybe would like to share some of their reflections before we close. But maybe Adam, your final remarks and your final reflections after hearing all of these reflections from Thando, Langa, and Nicole.
I can only really echo what Tali has said, that it's really lovely to see how this particular group of students and Thando, Nicole, Langa have continued to live with this experience, and how it's continued to influence them. So that's certainly it's very heartening to hear. but also in a very self-interested way. Tali and myself, we can be proud of what we chose very well. That we had a notice of competitive process to be part of this tour, and certainly Nicole and Thando and Lana are very impressive, but part of a very impressive group. And I think that is again one of the very positive and heartening elements of the tour for me, is that this realization that yes, in South Africa we often see it's a country which reminds us of its worst inclinations at times, but at the same time there are very, very promising things, and it's human capital, people like our students who will make it a great country in future. So it's so lovely to really to see them all, and to see others, Cassandra and other students here too. But it's to me part of this intensive time with such an impressive and thoughtful and caring and as I think Langa described them, a sort of philosophical group of students who engaged and put themselves out there and took things to heart. And this is to me made it so worthwhile.
Thank you, Dr. Adam Mandelson. Thank you, Sharon Ricks. Thank you, Ronelle Gugamore. Thank you, Nicole Jones. Thank you, Dr. Langa Twala. And thank you, Thando Ndita. Thank you very much for joining us and taking the time to be part of this amazing discussion. Thank you to all of you who were part of the tour in 2018, also who joined us this evening. And good luck for the future, projects and future prospects and your endeavors and your goals in life. Good luck, and I wish you all the best with that. Keep well, everyone. I know we're going through very difficult, very confusing times, particularly at the moment, but you can't lose hope. So we have to just hold on and things will get better. So thank you very much. Please visit our website, which is www.jhbholocaust.co.za for more information about upcoming events for the remainder of this year. And perhaps we might tell you about what's happening next year, because next year is coming very, very soon. So good night. Thank you very much for joining us. Thank you. Thank you.